Welcome once again to Durkee Community Church. As you all know, today is Easter Sunday, a day that holds a lot of significance for a lot of people, especially Christians. Although with the crazy things that are going on in the world today, you can't meet in person and share this day with your church family, you can still share it through your thoughts and prayers, and I hope that all of you who are viewing this video will do exactly that. So let's look at what Easter really represents, shall we? Easter Sunday. There are a lot of things going on in just those two words, depending on how you view the world. For example, there's the Easter Bunny, who doesn't appear even once in the Bible, yet who every year has a whole slew of TV commercials broadcasting his arrival, along with his cousin, the Cadbury Bunny. After all, anyone who's seen any of the commercials on TV knows that the Cadbury Bunny is the world's greatest source of that all-time favorite, the Cadbury cream egg, right? And of course, when the Easter Bunny comes, he's supposed to bring those cool colored eggs for you parents to hide so your kids can go look for them. I know when I was a kid, hunting those brightly colored Easter eggs was a pretty big deal. And speaking of Easter eggs, where did that tradition come from anyway? Well, from what I've been able to find out, nobody really knows for sure. Before we get to the egg part of the story, though, what about the bunny? We can't just leave him, or her as the case may be, hanging now, can we? Anyone who has ever had anything to do with raising rabbits knows just how prolific a critter they are. Consequently, the hare became, in the pagan mind, a symbol of fertility, and eggs were considered a symbol of renewal in life. So the rabbit, or hare, became the Easter Bunny. But rabbits don't lay eggs, so how in the world did two such unrelated objects come to be part of the celebration of Easter? The tradition of Easter eggs appears, as nearly as I can tell, to have come to this country with German settlers in the 1700s, but nobody can tell you for sure how the tradition got to Germany. Also, in some countries, people will exchange colored eggs, often painted or dyed red, as a symbol of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This exchange of eggs is often accompanied by those doing the exchanging saying, "Christ is risen," answered by, "He is risen indeed." All of the above having been said, what could rabbits and colored eggs possibly have to do with the resurrection of Jesus? Well, nothing really, although many scholars seem to actually believe that the whole concept of eggs, since they are where baby birds come from, is that they are symbolic not of birth, but of rebirth. In other words, the eggs symbolize Christ's resurrection and his transformation from an earthly body to a heavenly body. And of course, there are always differences of opinion regarding the origin of most words, and the name Easter is no exception. Some scholars, dating back several hundred years, were pretty sure that the name Easter came from the name of what pagans called the goddess of the dawn, or of spring, depending on your source of information, Astarte. Astarte was known by different names depending on the language being used, but all of them pretty much sounded something like Easter. On the other hand, others felt, and still do, that Easter came from the German word Oster, which can be loosely translated as resurrection. So maybe it would be a better idea to call Easter Sunday Resurrection Day instead. I'm sure I don't know, but I really can't see a name change like that catching on anytime soon, can you? We've called it Easter Sunday for far too long. But that still doesn't really get us to how Easter became a Christian tradition and a celebration of the resurrection of Christ. However, the answer to that one is actually relatively easy. The church did it. Or rather, one church did it. The Roman Catholic Church. Back in the day, the church was trying to make the pagan religions go away, and somebody decided that the easiest way to do that was to absorb them. As a way to do that, several pagan festivals were, shall we say, Christianized to make it easier for the pagans to convert, and a celebration of spring's rebirth, which was named for the pagan goddess mentioned earlier, was one of those. So that brings us to what really, truly happened on that particular day or set of days so many centuries ago. Last Sunday, which is commonly referred to as Palm Sunday, is considered to be the day that saw Jesus' humble entry into Jerusalem riding on a donkey's colt. He knew that he was going to his death, but he went anyway because he also knew that it was the Father's will that he go and be sacrificed to wash away the sins of people, both present and future. He was also going to be sacrificed in order to open a way for people to reach God directly, since doing it through earthly priests really hadn't worked out all that well for the vast majority of the people of the day. After their arrival at a particular house in Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples ate the Passover meal at that house. And while they were eating, he told the men that one of them would betray him into the hands of the mob so that he would be put to death. Of course, none of them wanted to believe it was possible, but we all know how that went. Please turn in your Bibles to the 26th chapter of the book of Matthew. I will once again be reading from the New King James Version of the Bible, and would like to begin in verse 17 of that chapter. So beginning in verse 17 of Matthew 26. Now on the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to a certain man, and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When the evening had come, he sat down with the 12. Now as they were eating, he said, "Assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each of them began to say to him, "Lord, is it I?" He answered and said, "He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born." Then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, "Rabbi, is it I?" He said to him, "You have said it." From the place of what has become known as the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives to pray, or at least he prayed. The disciples mostly went to sleep. Being human at the time, he prayed that what he knew was going to take place be taken away from him. But being also a part of God at the same time, he prayed that the Father's will be done instead of his. I don't know too many people who, knowing that they were going to face an extremely painful death, would still say, as Jesus did later on in that same chapter 26 of Matthew, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." His human side wanted, like I think that we would all want, to be able to get on with his life. But his godly side, the side most important to us, was willing to sacrifice himself to God's plan. And so it was indeed done. He was taken prisoner and dragged before the chief priest, then from there to Pilate, where he was beaten and tortured by the Roman soldiers before being forced to carry the means of his own destruction to Golgotha, the place of a skull, although he didn't actually end up carrying it most of the way. So please now turn to chapter 27 of Matthew and go to verse 27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Now as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. And when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, place of a skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink. But when he had tasted it, he would not drink. So Jesus was crucified, and he died on that cross. His body was pierced, and his clothing was scattered between the Roman soldiers who cast lots for it. Then he was buried in a tomb cut out of the living stone of the mountains, and a large rock was rolled in front of the tomb. For pretty much anybody, it would be pretty hard to make any kind of an escape from a situation like that. And yet he did just exactly that. He escaped from the tomb. He arose from the dead, just as he had predicted several times during the time that he spent with his disciples before his death, in which they could never understand. One example of that prediction is in the 9th chapter of the book of Mark, when he told them, "The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise the third day." But as I said, they could never understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask. So it wasn't until afterwards that they finally figured out what he had been talking about. Now the Pharisees, who didn't want to believe anything he said at any time, also didn't trust his followers not to fake such a rising. They could fake that rising by taking his body and then standing around claiming that he had come back to life, seeing as how he wasn't in the tomb anymore, that is. At the same time, they'd seen him bring Lazarus back to life, so the Pharisees didn't want to take any chances on him being able to come back to life himself, or even to appear that he'd done such a miraculous thing. So they went to Pilate and asked him to place a guard on the tomb, which he did. But as we're about to see shortly, that didn't really do him a whole lot of good. Please go down to verse 62 of Matthew 27. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember while he was still alive how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' So the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard, go your way, make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. Then on the 3rd day, which traditionally is said to have been a Sunday, the women who had been ministering to Jesus in life went to the tomb to see to his embalming. The problem with that idea was that he wasn't there. The good part of that idea was that he wasn't there. But please turn to verse 1 of the next chapter of Matthew, chapter 28. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples word. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "Rejoice!" So they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection were predicted many times before they actually took place, many centuries before they actually took place. And the 53rd chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament tells that story quite eloquently. It also tells us why it happened. So please turn to verse 1 of Isaiah 53. Who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, he has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Jesus wasn't sentenced to die, and he wasn't resurrected to save himself, although a lot of the spectators told him to do just exactly that, to save himself. Instead, he gave himself to die on the cross to save us, you and me, and every man, woman, and child then, now, and in the future. He did it not because we deserved it, because I'm fairly certain that very few of us human types can possibly deserve what he did for us. He did it because he loved us more than he loved life itself. And he did it because he knew that when he died, he would be opening a way for all of us to come to God directly. You still have to go through him to get there, but because he is part of God, you can come to the Father in a straight line instead of having to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. And this all happened because of one man who was willing to give all that he had in order to make a way for those created in the name of God and the image of God to approach that God. He is risen indeed, and we should all be thankful that he is. One of my favorite songs by Dolly Parton is titled "He's Alive," and I'd like to play that now for you.
I feel very honored to get to sing this song on the show tonight, and as Mama would say, I hope you get a blessing out of it. The gates and doors were barred and all the windows fastened down. I spent the night in sleeplessness and rose at every sound, half in hopeless sorrow and half in fear the day would find the soldiers breaking through to drag us all away. And just before the sunrise I heard something at the wall. The gate began to rattle and a voice began to call. So I hurried to the window, looked down into the streets, expecting swords and torches and the sound of soldiers' feet. But there was no one there but Mary, so I went down to let her in. John stood there beside me as she told me where she'd been. She said they'd moved him in the night and none of us knows where. The stone's been rolled away and now his body isn't there. So we both ran toward the garden and John ran on ahead. We found the stone and empty tomb just the way that Mary said. But the winding sheet they wrapped him in was just an empty shell. And how or where they'd taken him was more than I could tell. Oh, but something strange had happened there, just what I did not know. John believed a miracle, but I just turned to go. Circumstance and speculation couldn't lift me very high, 'cause I'd seen them crucify him and I saw him die. Back inside the house again, the guilt and anguish came, and everything I'd promised him just added to my shame. When at last it came to choices, I denied I knew his name. And even if he was alive, it wouldn't be the same. Then suddenly the air was filled with a strange and sweet perfume. The light that came from everywhere drove shadows from the room. And Jesus stood before me with his arms held open wide. Then I fell down on my knees and I just clung to him and cried. Then he raised me to my feet, and as I looked into his like sunlight from the skies. Guilt and my confusion disappeared in sweet release. And every fear I'd ever had just melted into peace. He's alive! Oh, he's alive! Oh, he's alive, and I'm forgiven. Heaven's gates are open wide. He's alive! He's
He is most definitely alive, and his hand is stretched out to all and sundry in the hope that you'll take it and allow him to save you and keep you alive eternally with him. Thank you for watching this video. As always, if you have questions, comments, criticisms, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I hope that you have a blessed day.